Welcome to What's Up with Catalight, a podcast designed to raise the many important voices that are helping to shape the future for people with autism and IDDs by challenging the status quo. Your host, Dr. Lindsey Sneed, dives into the thought-provoking topics happening in the industry and at Catalight, from advocacy to research to treatment options and more. Tune in to discover how Catalight's innovative treatment options are pressuring industry-wide change and shining a spotlight on care that's shaping the landscape for individuals with developmental disabilities. This is What's Up with Catalight.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining our 5th episode of What's Up with Catalight. Maybe 6th. I actually don't know. I'm really excited about our guest today. We have Peter. So Peter is an autistic self-advocate and speaker who has benefited greatly from building community and friendship through playing games. So Peter is a consultant for Behavior Bridges in Washington State. This is an organization that provides behavioral and educational services to autistic individuals across the lifespan. Where Peter's specifically focusing on inclusion. He also facilitates Dungeons and Dragons support groups and social groups, a tabletop role-playing game, and he believes that building authentic community is one of the key components of healthy autistic development. He's given numerous talks on how to utilize tabletop role-playing games and video gaming to organically build autistic-led communities. So I'm so excited for Peter to be here. Peter's actually done a few things with Catalight, but Peter and I met for the first time a few months ago at the American Psychological Association conference. And I feel like we could have just kept talking for hours and hours. So I'm so glad that Peter is here today. Welcome, Peter.
Hello.
I have my first question for you. So we're really going to be focusing on lived experiences today. And maybe you could start by talking a little bit about your lived experience. Can you just talk about your journey of diagnosis and what that has meant for you?
I identify myself as an autistic self-advocate, but I think a really big reason why I am so effective at this is because for a long time, I was rocking an ADHD diagnosis. And this kind of happened in first grade when ADHD was really in vogue. So you have this kid that is not impulsive at all, not hyperactive at all, but in a really busy classroom with a bunch of chaotic first graders cannot focus. Oh yeah, that's definitely ADHD. He needs to be on time-release Ritalin that he's going to chew because the texture bothers him. For years and years and years, I went around thinking, there's something just wrong with me. I'm a terrible ADHD person. You know, none of these life hacks work for me. And yet all my friends are autistic. I love role-playing games. I love all these autistic hobbies. And then I'm in my 30s and I've been, doing autism social skills groups and, they called me the angry autistic boy whisperer when I was working in crisis because I was really good at talking about video games and getting on their wavelength to de-escalate them.
Wow.
And a friend of mine who diagnoses autism for a living, Dr. Lucas Harrington, actually was speaking with him at the American Psychological Association.
Yeah.
He's like, Peter, you should probably get assessed. And then lo and behold, it clicked. And then something happened that not a lot of people talk about. A lot of people say, oh yeah, when you get your diagnosis, suddenly everything clicks. Well, there's also an 8-month sort of processing period where you're reflecting on your life and realizing things and realizing the tremendous humanity of people and the tremendous capacity for cruelty in people. And everything is now contextualized. But also the benefit there is you now have a working toolkit.
Yeah.
And woof, my life is so much better now that I can actually advocate for my own needs. So this journey of getting a real diagnosis and working through this has just really helped me understand, a lot of the things I was doing kind of organically were self-advocacy, doing it blind, feeling helpless. And I want to be able to pass on everything I can on learning how to just survive in a world that you don't have a map for, you don't have the right tools for, and everything's turning against you.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm doing, and I'm climbing the mountain of trying to learn all kinds of new things, and it's been wild. But I really liked getting diagnosed with autism. It meant I was in a cool kids club.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. And I think like your journey has had in the talks that I've seen you do, both at Catalight and then at APA, I think it really makes a big impact and it creates a safe space for other autistic folks to come forward and their lived experiences. And something you said, like I do autistic evaluations for children through 18.
Mhm.
And you said something that almost every autistic youth that I've diagnosed with autism has said, and it's that I've lived my life feeling so weird. Like it's like weird or like strange to other people, or just feel so disconnected from what other people are saying versus um, what their lived experience is.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's quite incredible to me that that's such a consistent story that I hear from autistic folks, particularly autistic folks who are diagnosed in later youth or adulthood.
No, it's something I think clarified just so much of my weirdness, because I
Mm,
grew up very religious, and I thought like,
okay.
wow, God just made a big old mistake with me. And then
Mm,
finding out the clarity is like, oh, okay, so I'm like Joseph, the guy who was really into this bright colored coat and couldn't stop talking about his dreams and was just really into info dumping
y-
and accounting. And
yeah.
when Pharaoh's wife was hitting on him, he was completely oblivious. He
Yeah.
was autistic and he was God's chosen, so maybe I can be God's chosen too. So, and
Wow.
it's all these kind of little finding the way that you can be special, finding the way
Yeah.
that you can be meaningful without being a freak or a loser or just someone that doesn't make sense. And that's
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I'm getting really excited looking at media these days. You see a lot of autistic characters showing up.
Yes.
There's I think it's called Monster High or some show like that. There's this little autistic boogeyman girl, and the voice actor is autistic, and she's
Oh,
this
wow.
this, this cute kid show, but this genuinely autistic character, and it's just fantastic. Just all kinds
Yeah.
of wonderful representation, and it makes me really, really happy.
Yeah. Yeah. There is a lot more representation, like even compared to like um, when we were in, elementary, middle, and high school. When I look at my daughters, one's an elementary, one's in middle school, and they actually both have autistic friends, and it's a
Nice.
lot more accepted and acknowledged, and it's a lot more okay to just be autistic. I think more now in the last 5 years than ever before.
Yes.
And I've been working in the field for 17 years. So in the last 5 years, I've seen like just a really, really, really big change in that inclusivity and acceptance. Not that it's ended, and not that it's doesn't need to keep moving forward, but it does seem to be progressing.
I think one of the things that I noticed after COVID
Mm-hmm.
was everyone had social skills deficits. And I
Yeah.
think that opened a lot of conversations around saying, I don't know how to act. I don't know what to do in this situation. So people could start being real. And I think that gave a lot of people license to say, maybe I am autistic. And also the ability to just talk about social difficulties and not knowing what to do and the loneliness. So I think that, kind of one of the silver linings there was people started talking about social difficulties and loneliness and these things that tremendously impact autistic people front and center. So the Overton window was there, and I think a lot of people were able to start making connections. So I think, even though it was a horrible, horrible thing, I think
Yeah.
that is one of the silver linings.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'd agree with you. Um, So maybe we can transition into like life experiences to fantasy experiences. Um, can you give us a bit of an overview on Dungeons and Dragons, what it is, the roles, the dynamics, how people play it in a group setting, and how did you first get involved in Dungeons and Dragons?
So Dungeons and Dragons is a tabletop role-playing game. And it's one of many. D&D isn't the only game in town. And what a role-playing game is I kind of like to describe it as a collaborative daydream where everyone is telling a fantasy story together.
I like
And
that.
there are two roles. There's the dungeon master or the game master. Their job is to facilitate the game. They are telling the story. They're saying, okay, you are approaching Blackgate Castle, and you see that there is a lumbering ogre in your way, and he has a large axe, and he's frothing at the mouth. What do you do? And then the players all are characters. So they're individuals and they describe what they're doing. And to keep
Okay.
them honest, they have to look at these things that look like tax forms called player sheets that describe their characters and what they can do. So a character might say, "Oh, I shoot my bow at him," or I shoot an arrow at him with my bow, and then
Okay.
they have to roll to see if they hit and how much it hurts the ogre, if any. And they go on and role play. And it started in the 70s as this very kind of crunchy hack and slash violent
Mm.
murderous game. And then as time went on, people started realizing that there was tremendous capacity for role playing and storytelling.
Mm.
So now you have this plethora of role playing games, some very much like Dungeons and Dragons, some very different, where the focus is storytelling, and you can tell any sort of story there. So there is a tremendous amount of possibility for kind of therapeutic approaches,
Yeah.
while remaining firmly rooted in a fantasy world. And my kind of start into it, I in middle school, I was lonely. I was
Okay.
trying to mask. I was trying to make friends in general, and it was rough. And then in seventh grade, a buddy of mine came up to me and said, "Hey, do you want to play Monsters and Mazes?" Which was his knockoff version of Dungeons and Dragons. It's also
Okay.
the name of a terrible Tom Hanks film from like the 80s about D&D. Don't watch it. It's really
Okay.
bad.
I won't watch
But
it, I
yeah,
promise.
it's terrible. It's loosely based on a true story about a kid that played D&D and ended up taking his life. So very dark and kind of the satanic panic back when a lot of Christians thought D&D was a one-way ticket to Satanism. Now I have pastor friends who play D&D with their youth groups. But in any case, he started playing with me. Next thing I know, I have friends.
Mm.
And my responsibility, my way of engaging with this friend group is to look at a battle map, move my character around, know what sort of attacks he has, know that he is an archer named Bill Gates who shoots flaming envelopes full of money, which was hilarious and well accepted.
Yeah.
And I just have to roll the dice, and that counts as friendship. So next thing I know, I'm hanging out with this group of guys. Every week we're having fun, and I have friends, I have community, and I start learning social skills by doing.
Mm.
I start learning autistic social skills. And there's a few neurotypicals in that group, and they start learning autistic social skills too. They learn how to be my friend. I learn
Yeah.
how to be their friend.
Yeah.
And by having big arguments about rules and, minutia in the game, we start learning problem solving and how to resolve conflict.
Mm.
And suddenly we're learning social skills. And into my 20s, I was a terrible 20-something-year-old. I was kind of a big dumpster fire, and so were a lot of my autistic friends. But because we were a gaming group, we would at least hang out once a week to play games and check in on each other and
Yeah.
support each other. And I'm still friends with that group.
Wow.
We're still super close. And honestly, we are the reason we're alive,
Wow.
because having an autistic centered safety net
Mm-hmm.
is so much more robust from a social capital perspective than a safety net that might require a lot of masking.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
imagine hanging out, you're autistic, you can hang out with your gamer buddy Frank's house where, you can just make your bedroom in the closet, no one bothers you, and you're fine until you can get a job and move out. Or you can move in with your grandma who's going to make all these expectations on you.
Yeah.
And that actually happened
Mm.
with one of our friends. He ended up homeless and just ended up living out of one of our gamer friends' closets for a few months while he got his stuff back together. But it was a safe place for him to recuperate and heal and, be supported.
Yeah, and you brought up something that I think I heard for the first time maybe a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago, and the idea of autistic social skills.
Yeah.
And within the context of those really, really important relationships that you're speaking about, there's difference between autistic social skills and neurotypical social skills. So for me, like the neurotypical social skills are probably gonna, they're gonna come a little bit more easy for me. I have to learn autistic social skills if I'm gonna engage with my autistic friends. But can you talk a little bit more about that autistic social skills, what that is, and why it's important?
So there's kind of two branches of it.
Okay.
There's the autistic social skills, and then something I kind of designed, a framework called autistic social advocacy skills,
Mm.
which I'm actually later this month a paper, peer-reviewed paper is coming out that I authored.
Congratulations.
Describing, yes, thank you. Describing this at framework, and it's going out on the Journal of Analog Role-Playing Studies,
Mm.
which is a Japanese journal, but it survived peer review, and the framework describes 6 different autistic social advocacy skills that are built on top of autistic social skills. Autistic social skills, I think, are just understanding the core traits of autistic communication, understanding that you're going to have a lot of info dumping, you're going to have a lot of parallel play, you're going to have a lot of either heavy physical touching or none at all. Roles and social norms probably are going to need to be constructed. And to learn about autistic social skills, go to an anime convention.
Mm.
That's where you're going to see them in the wild. Now, when I was running my D&D social skills groups, COVID happened, and we ended up going to Discord, which is this chat app that kind of has a persistent chat app, but also video conferencing capabilities. So it's kind of like Zoom, but a persistent chat. So the kids would talk about game after game, and then just start talking about whatever. And at one point, one of the kids said, "Hey, one of my teachers just made fun of me for being autistic." And it was like watching someone hit a hornet's nest. And the kids were
Mm.
providing really good advocacy advice, including how to sue the school district.
Oh, yep.
Yeah. I
I
was
mean,
like,
very specific advice.
yeah, I was like, this is amazing. This is really cool. And so I came up with kind of this framework for autistic social advocacy, which starts with the skills,
Mm.
which are self and peer advocacy, being safe around each other, and
Mhm.
dealing equitably, addressing conflicting access needs. So, for example, the kid that's really, really loud and the kids that are really, really noise sensitive, learning how they can play together, but
Mhm.
letting the kids figure it out, not having an adult coming in to say, this is what's going to happen. Because if there's an adult coming in to resolve issues, then nothing is learned. Um, and then the other side of it is building autistic identity. So there's autistic joy, which is, falling in love with your autism, finding the fun parts of it. And then there's understanding autistic identity and normalizing it. Normalizing autism. And I think having autistic facilitators is really good for this, because if you can say as a leader, I'm autistic,
Yeah.
that helps set the tone. And then I think one of the really important parts is autistic contextualization, which is where kids will talk about their autistic traits and contextualize them in a sort of way where they can share that as a cultural asset of a
Mm.
piece of their culture, like
Yeah.
talk about their special interests and info
Yeah.
dumping about their special interests.
Yeah.
That turns it into a culture. Once it's a culture, people can start, approaching it with all kinds of deficit-based approach, but
Mm.
you've got it as a culture, you've got it as an identity, it's something that brings you joy. Your armor is going to be a lot thicker
Yeah.
against the stigma
Yeah.
versus someone who hasn't been through that, someone who's always been alone, who thinks
Yeah.
their autism is, the R word,
Yep. Yep.
and they will internalize that. So
Yep.
yeah, it's real important to develop those skills.
Yeah. Along the lines of Dungeons and Dragons and like how can be such an amazing and safe space to develop autistic social skills. Just a little bit more about you. You have a Therapeutic Dungeon Master certification from Geek Therapeutics. Can you tell us what that entails?
So I kind of like to describe myself as a rogue advocate.
Rogue
Um,
advocate.
I kind of just want to understand autism and how autistics engage with geek culture and how gaming can help them develop social skills and just how autistics can improve their quality of life. And
Yeah.
I'm doing this, working for various agencies, but I always have a much higher goal of understanding the big picture. So what I do is I go to conferences and conventions and stuff and talk to people and do talks and really, really try to get to know the system. And
Mm.
I had the pleasure of meeting Tony Bean, who runs Geek Therapeutics, and
Okay.
he recognized me because I run a website called Roll for Kindness. That's
Okay.
ROLLFOR kindness.com.
Ah.
And it is kind of just my blog talking about, hey, here's some cool tools that I'm using for my D&D groups. And here's some tips on helping autistics be successful in these groups. He was familiar with my work and actually invited me to get the certification.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was, for free, which was amazing. And
Yeah.
I, of course, did a review on it. I found it very good. One of the little surprises was one of the the teachers was my former co-facilitator for one of the groups I run.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah. So he ended up telling this really embarrassing story about how the kids pulled a fast one, completely derailed my plan, just to illustrate this is why you don't plan too much. And of course, I was cackling because I also love to tell this story, and so getting to hear this epic story of how I had just written like 16 pages of plot about how this dwarf mafia is going to be chasing these kids around and blah, blah, blah. And then one of the kids has a wish spell up his sleeve, and he says, I wish the dwarf mafia was gone.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
like, I just emailed this guy 16 pages of plot and just
It's
down the
out the
drain.
window.
Yep.
Yeah. No longer applicable.
So, and that's a really, really important thing to remember if you're running this sort of group. Do not plan too much.
Yep.
Do not plan too much. Be flexible.
Yes. Which is another good, I mean, that's in and of itself is a good skill to have. Flexibility can be really challenging for anybody. Um, and then, that's incorporating that into role playing. And it's probably a lot easier to tolerate flexibility and in situations where you really enjoy what you're doing.
Mhm.
And so then you get to practice engaging in flexible behavior when you're in the context of something that you really enjoy anyway. Um,
Well, I think it's also really empowering,
mm,
right? If you as a facilitator can be flexible with kids
yeah,
in a world that has been very traditionally inflexible,
yeah.
the best compliment I've ever gotten from one of my kids is, "You are the most reasonable adult I know," which is heartbreaking because it means there's a lot of
It's
adults that aren't reasonable.
yeah.
But an example of me being flexible is I was running this girls group in a partnership with the UW Autism Center, or
Okay.
the University of Washington Autism Center, and the girls, one of them was boy crazy.
Okay.
I mean, really boy crazy. So there was this whole plot of goblins planning on invading the town and, burning down a bunch of buildings. But all the girls were like, well, one of the girls was like, there's this guard character. I want him to be my boyfriend. So they spent like 3 sessions going to every restaurant in town. I had to make him up on the fly, planning the perfect date, which of course was ruined because the goblins invaded. And then said boyfriend, this guard, kept on rolling ones when he was trying to sneak around. And so he just screwed everything up. And at the end, the girl that was really boy crazy dumped him in the most public way possible.
Oh
There was
boy.
there was a town PA system that would like project voices, and she was right next to it, and that's how she dumped him.
Oh wow. Eh, But like even just as you're telling that story, I'm like, wow, you're getting to practice like romantic relationship skills too.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
dumping your embarrassment of a boyfriend in a really public way. I'm sure that's a life skill somehow.
Yeah. I mean it has to be. It's happened to everybody, right?
Mhm.
So along those lines, so in what ways have you seen the gaming help autistic individuals with like those communication challenges, with like social communication challenges. And what about the role playing games? Like you've kind of dove into this a lot already, like with the autistic social skills and how you're in the community, you're getting to build relationships with other people who are like-minded or have similar interests. Um, and so that goes a long way because you're getting to practice skills in that context. But what have you seen specifically in ways that it's helped improve communication?
I I've been doing this for like 11 years,
Yeah.
so just about everything.
Mm.
And I was kind of thinking about this particular idea of like what's the most impressive thing I've seen, and I literally cannot tell you because it's so impactful,
Mm.
so effective.
Yeah.
I think one of my greatest accomplishments is there's this joke that kids don't leave my group; they end up getting hired to help run it, which has actually happened.
Yeah.
My current co-facilitator is one of my former students,
Wow.
and so seeing her go from being this young woman who there was this 14-year-old girl who could barely talk and was just very shy, very quiet, very unsure of her voice. And she played this druid character that was very bookish, very not used to talking with people. And then we kind of challenged her and said, we want you to play like this sort of pro wrestler persona, as this tournament fighter. And she was very much wooed by the very impressive stats that we were willing to offer her. And she liked the ability of being able to do this much damage and be super confident. And next thing I know, there's this prissy nobleman that I'm is one of the characters that I'm playing as, who's just trash talking the entire party. And she says to me, "This is hard because this is not how I work." And
Mm.
then she says, I grab him by the scruff of his neck, lift him up a foot, and scream in his face, "You shut up, or you're going to be dealing with my fist in your face."
Wow.
And like her voice is loud, she's confident, she's taking up half the table.
Yeah.
And I've seen stuff like that happen over and over again. I've seen kids work out conflicts, step in to help each other peer mediate conflicts.
Yeah.
I've seen kids just learn to absolutely self-advocate. I've learned kids argue and work it out. I've seen kids do complex problem solving. I've seen kids fall in love with their info dumping sessions and just normalize that. One of the
Yeah.
kids described my groups as being maximum autism.
Mm.
And for a teenager to describe something as maximum autism and mean it
Yeah.
in a good way
Yeah.
is something I don't think has ever happened in the history of anything. But
Yeah.
he was so just in love with the fact that this group made him feel normal.
Yeah. And, there's such a recurring theme of self advocacy. Like, and I know that that's really, really important to you.
Mhm.
And your paper is coming out around this topic.
Yeah.
But it's really striking to me how much self advocacy is coming in there. Because even when there is a conflict, right? Like, a conflict is somebody having to advocate for their own needs in a situation, right? So they're learning these conflict management skills, um like you said, like in such a safe space, and the empowerment, like just being able to be confident in who you are, like that's so important, just to be confident in who you are and be okay with who you are. um and the community that you've created for these individuals, I mean, it's quite incredible. And I think it's such an important thing to be talking about. Peter's actually going to be a 2-episode podcast guest. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in our next podcast, specifically around the importance of having autistic facilitators.
Mhm.
But it's just like, that's just really, it's coming up for me really, really striking. You're creating this safe space for these individuals to explore a piece of themselves, like actually a core of who they are, and be okay with it.
Well, I reflect on growing up and playing D&D at my buddy's house. and how most of the time at school, I was getting bullied. I was getting isolated. I would come back to class and my chair would be missing, or
Mm,
they'd beat me up or do awful things to me. But I could have one night where I'd stay
yeah.
up till 2 a.m. being a half elf cleric named Parin, who was with a gnome rogue named Palin and a half ogre Granak and yada yada yada, all these characters, and I could feel like myself through this game and be able to mask in a way that didn't hurt
Mm,
because it was fun. It
yeah.
was joyful. I was getting to be someone else.
Yeah.
And I could have this escapism that was also making me fall in love with my friends. Fall in love with my friends in a way that we were constructing
Mm,
in a very imaginational way.
yeah.
Because, you know, one of the things that people forget how to do as they get old is they forget how to play. They forget how to
Mm,
make believe. And
yeah.
this is something that I think does tremendous damage to us.
Mm,
And by connecting with that part of you that can be cooperatively creative,
yeah.
that can do this stuff, it has tremendous value. And being able to create your own social world around this, where your norms are the norms,
Yeah.
gives you such a moment of personal respite.
Mm,
So
yeah.
it's life support for us.
And I also am hearing too, like consistently, we chat a little bit about this at APA, and then I'm hearing it now, is that learning the skills in a fun, safe environment where these individuals can be authentically autistic, but they're able to take those skills into other parts of their lives.
Hmm.
And yeah, like I'm hearing that. I've heard stories that you've told me about that, but just it's really really meaningful. I mean, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I just want for a lot of the autistic, particularly middle schoolers, I'm like, man, I want to get them involved into D&D groups, right? Because it's such a safe space. It's a fun environment.
It
Autistic
can be.
authenticity. Okay.
Yeah, it can be. I
So there,
have
talk more about
uh
that.
yeah, so this is in alignment with the second podcast on why autistic inclusion into group facilitation is important and why you need
Yeah.
autistic leaders. But if you're running a D&D group that is led by a neurotypical person and they're establishing neurotypical norms, um, a lot of autistics, and I've heard so many horror stories of autistics saying, "Yeah, I joined my after-school D&D club or the library D&D club, and they it wasn't a good time for me." So I think there is tremendous need for people who have that experience and what I call lived expertise.
Yeah.
Lived experience is important, but lived expertise is absolutely critical. You need to be good at living as an autistic person, and I think a
Yes.
lot of autistic people aren't very good at living as an autistic person. Living successfully as a authentic autistic person is an act of resistance,
Mm,
and you need to remember that.
mm,
You need to remember that this is, every day you're waking up in a world that wants to exterminate the most profoundly impacted of your type. And they just want to start there. And then they'll keep on growing and keep on growing and keep on growing until next thing you know, you have to mask.
yeah.
You can't stim out in public.
Yeah.
I remember the way things used to be. I mean, we talk about things getting better for autistics.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I stimmed in high school, I would have gotten my face slammed into a locker so fast.
Yeah.
In fact, it did happen. So it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, you gotta realize you surviving and thriving and normalizing this stuff is an act of resistance in a world that is secretly wanting you gone, and sometimes overtly wanting you gone or wanting you to be invisible.
One of the things that was really striking to me when we chatted in Washington was when you were talking about that, like that expertise, that lived expertise, and you're talking about the lived expertise, particularly like when you have failed and like having failure, and like why that is such important lived expertise in the context of leading these role playing groups. Um, because you want the individuals that you're working with to like, well, I've been there. Like, it's going to be okay. You're going to be able to get through this.
So failing. First off, with autistic facilitators, I want them to have the social experiences they need. I've seen a lot of autistics try to get into this field and fall apart, and then I find out that in their personal life they don't have any friends. And
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
oh, so you don't have lived expertise. But then the failure point, learning how to fail safely is a critical skill.
Mm-hmm.
Learning how to take the good risks is an essential skill, and D&D is wonderful because you can make up any sort of context you want. I've got one campaign where they were running a theme park, and so they were having to make some pretty sizable risks to keep this place open. It was like a business management sim. It was one of the best quarters I've ever run. But I think that primes them to really think about what risks they want to take, what risks they
Yeah.
can take, because dignity of risk is really important. And in my 20s, my philosophy was bite off more than I can chew,
Okay.
then chew it.
Ah.
And I failed a lot, but I learned how to fail. I learned how to fall and pick myself up. I learned that customer service is not a good job for me. Getting fired was probably a sign that, hey, this isn't the way I want to go. I need to find something else. And I think finding out how to take risks and what risks to take through a game, through simulations, is really good because, I'm all for dignity of risks, but there's, probably good risks to take, like trying out a job that might not be a good fit for you, I think is a really good risk to take.
Yeah.
Because you'll learn that this wasn't a good job for me and I should not go into this field.
Yeah.
But then there's bad risks, like trying fentanyl. That's a bad risk. So
Don't
getting
try
to
fentanyl.
don't try fentanyl. If you take anything from this podcast, don't do fentanyl. It's bad.
That is not a good risk.
It's not a good risk.
We like when I think about like wanting to get like helping other people get involved in this potentially, like if it's a good fit for them, it is, one of the things about the pandemic, another silver lining is the expansion of like people just having more access to video conferencing abilities. Like, is D&D something, I know it happens in person, is it something that also happens online?
Yeah, and I have been in quite a few campaigns that have been online only. There is a
Okay.
huge streaming world of games. There's a lot of people who kind of turn their games into a podcast.
Oh.
And like my last time actually playing D&D for fun was on a streaming game because everyone was living up in Bellevue and I was down in Tacoma, so they invited me to guest star as a character almost completely based on Columbo. He was fun. He's a little gnomish detective, and I watched a bunch of Columbo to get into the learn all his mannerisms. But yeah, there's a lot of online games. For my groups, I can do online games. I have
Mhm.
done them
Okay.
quite a bit in the past. I prefer in person.
Okay.
And right now, kind of the way the industry is going, at least what I'm seeing, is people running online groups are having a hard time filling them. Just
Oh.
because no one wants to do online stuff anymore. Everyone is completely zoomed out. And there is a little bit, but it's been harder to make it work. Whereas a lot of in-person stuff, you get butts and seats.
Yeah.
People want an in-person group. They're
Yeah.
willing to pay for an in-person group some of the times. I think having that interpersonal connection is really, really critical. But there's also an accessibility piece
Yeah.
with doing the online stuff. So
Yeah.
you can do both. I prefer to do in person these days just because I think it's more effective. But both are options.
I think something that our listeners are probably really anxious to hear about, Peter, is can you talk about some of your D&D campaigns that you have going on recently or are going on presently that you're excited about?
So talking about the theme park, I've run theme parks a few times, but uh, the theme park campaign that I ran was a 10-week thing where, and this was part of my long-running campaign. So in this world, the internet kind of exists in the form of magical spell books that can talk to each other.
Yeah.
And because the internet exists, manga and anime exists. And there's this incredibly popular anime series called Autumn High Memories, which is this traditional high school romance manga that got really, really weird later on. And there's this whole arc about trebuchets that got really, really popular. So they made a theme park called Autumn High Trebuchet Land, and everything was trebuchet themed. And for those of
What?
you who don't know,
Thank you.
a trebuchet is like a oversized catapult that uses a bunch of esoteric physics to make chunks of rock fly, thousands of yards so they can destroy castles. Well, one of the kids in my group was a big medieval warfare nerd, so trebuchets were an inordinate amount of this campaign. But,
I love it.
Oh, it's wonderful. So they were running this theme park, and every morning their secretary would come in and say, hey, here are the problems, and they would have to problem solve and figure out what they're going to do. So there was an artificial intelligence that had been designed to help run the rides. So they needed to go teach this very autistic coded artificial intelligence social skills, and then ethics, teaching it that, profit is not purpose.
Wow.
Privacy is important.
Wow.
Things that maybe ChatGPT should be learning.
Yeah.
And it was really magical. There was almost no combat. I'm actually really proud of this because, people talk about D&D and it's like, yeah, it's this magical world. There's all these dragons and creatures. And then you get this tax form looking character sheet. And it's like, okay, and here's all the ways you can murder something. Because it comes from this game where, hack and slash was a thing. So the only combat in this whole quarter was them tackling a shoplifter. Not even hurting him, just tackling this guy.
Bringing him down.
Yeah. And that was it. Everything else was the kids having all these problems coming up, like power mad fantasy OSHA, or an angry parent group, or the contractors going on strike, or things like that. And having to come up with these really interesting solutions.
Yeah.
But what I was really, really happy about was one of the kids kind of struggles to know what to do. And sometimes there were times when there weren't many good fits for him. He wasn't going to be the best person to talk with the artificial intelligence about ethics. He didn't have the character skills to go fix the engineering problem. And so one of the problems with this theme park was it's built on a cursed graveyard. And
of course.
Yeah. There's a bunch of problems with this place. And so he decided to go make a garden and to venerate this battle that had occurred here. And so over time, I was actually started talking with the ghosts who were curious, like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I knew that this was the site of a massive battle, thousands and thousands of years ago. I want to make it beautiful. And the ghosts started reaching out and communicating with him. And at the very end, there was this army that was going to destroy the theme park because they had very distinct opinions about anime that disagreed with the theme park's philosophy. And the ghosts ended up rising up and fighting this army off.
Wow.
And the atmosphere at the table was like that one kid had kicked the final goal of a soccer game.
Oh,
wow. They were clapping him on the back. They were cheering him on. They were just, so into this kid. And that might have been the only time that kid had ever experienced anything like that.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. And, he still rides that high. And just stuff like that where you can introduce all these different things. And I think one of the most powerful tools that I've introduced is the idea of nonviolent resolution. Because when violence is the default of a game, finding a way to say, no, let's do something different, I think is such a potent tool that teaches you resistance skills and how to think outside the box and look for gentle solutions. I think that is one of the biggest core features of advocacy is looking for a better way forward than what is presented to you on paper.
Wow, Peter, that is just so incredible. I love that nonviolent resolution and how you've incorporated that. And I am hyper aware of our time. And I cannot wait to read your article when it comes out. So I like to end just with like a super random question. What is something that you have planned in the next 3 months or so that you're really looking forward to doing that has been like just going to bring you so much joy?
I am putting out an article.
Yeah.
That's it. It was interesting. Last year, I became a national speaker. I spoke in Philly,
Yeah.
DC, and Boston, and Seattle, and just became this very, very widespread speaker. This year, I was hoping to become an international speaker. That
Okay.
didn't work out, but I am getting actually 3 things published. An interview with me is being published up on Sage
Wow.
Publishing, and I've got the article coming out in the
Yeah.
Journal of Analog Role-Playing Systems.
Yep.
And weirdly enough, an article or a poem is getting published in an anthology
Wow.
about institutionalization and how it changes your life.
Wow.
And so this is just the year that I put a bunch of stuff out there in the world, and I'm just really excited to see it all get out there.
Well, congratulations. I know that it's making a big impact already, and I'm really thankful for the work, and I've already learned a lot from you in the very short time that I've gotten to know you. So, Peter, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. And thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next time.
This has been What's Up with Catalight, hosted by Dr. Lindsey Sneed. Now you know what's up with Catalight.